The men at Holland's store heard about it before the week was out. A thin-faced man buying salt said it first, loud enough for the counter and the door and the road beyond. "That girl bought a grave for $3. The laughter carried. A teamster bet a plug of tobacco she would last 3 nights after the first hard freeze. A churchwoman said it would be kinder to take the deed back. South of town, below the bluff road, the girl they were laughing about knelt in frozen mud beside a hole in the earth, hauling dirt by the bucketful, her fingernails black, and her palms split open. She did not stop. She did not look toward the road. She dug. The deed was wet before she reached the road. Sleet had come sideways off the bluff since noon, and the ink on the quitclaim Goodhue County, half-acre remnant, Assen Cellar lot, bled at the margins where Alma Lillian Brecka's thumb pressed too hard. She was 19. She had $3 in county scrip folded inside her left boot, a cracked shovel with a split handle bound in wire, one wool blanket that smelled of the Poor Farm laundry vats, and half a loaf of bread wrapped in a page from the Red Wing Argus. The county superintendent had written able-bodied beside her name in the discharge ledger. That single word closed every door in Goodhue County, every charity bed, every church fund, every emergency petition. Able-bodied meant capable. Capable meant gone. She had no living relative who would claim her. Her mother had died of lung fever when Alma was 7. Her father had been crushed under a shifting load of limestone 2 years after that on a road north of Zumbrota that Alma could not bring herself to walk. 9 years at the county poor farm had followed. 9 years of laundry kettles, root cellar work, and the particular silence of a girl no one was raising on purpose. She was literate because the farm matron believed reading prevented idleness. She was strong because wringing bed sheets for 60 residents built the kind of grip that did not let go easily. And she was observant because cellar work, which the larger girls refused, had been safer than field labor for a slight child who learned early that adults forgot you were there if you stayed below the floor. Now the floor was gone. The poor farm was behind her. And the land she had been given, the land no farmer would bid on at the tax auction, the land the county clerk had handed over with the expression of a man discarding a problem, was a depression in the frozen earth at the bottom of a hill, 30 minutes' walk south of Red Wing, where the old Assen homestead had rotted into the dirt sometime before Alma was born. She stood at the edge of it. The cellar hole was roughly 12 feet across at its widest, filled with collapsed sod, shattered timber, and a skin of ice that cracked when the sleet hit it. No walls stood above ground, no chimney, no roof beam, no well curb. The nearest tree line was 200 yards east, and the trees were scrub elm, not oak, too thin for building, too green for fuel. The wind came off the Mississippi bluffs without obstruction and hit the hillside like a hand. Alma set the shovel against her hip and looked at the hole that was now hers. The footsteps came before the voice. Deputy Rulon Teague appeared first, mud on his boots to the ankle, his face the color of someone assigned a task he did not want. Behind him came Orrin Quaid. Quaid was 61. He had been a county commissioner for 9 years, and a frame carpenter for 30 before that. He walked with a black locust cane not because his legs were weak, but because the cane let him point at things without bending. He had buried men after bad winters, not as an undertaker, but as a neighbor who owned a wagon and did not refuse the work. People in Red Wing listened to Quaid because Quaid had carried frozen bodies out of shanties that looked, from the outside, like places a person could survive. He did not greet Alma. He walked the rim of the collapsed cellar and pointed with the cane. "No roof," Quaid said. He pointed again. "No dry timber, no standing chimney, no hay for chinking, no stovepipe, no well curb." He tapped the frozen earth twice. "No root crop, no cordwood." He turned to Alma. His breath made a thin cloud between them. A bare minimum shanty, 12 by 16, board walls, no loft, runs $28 in lumber and nails. A used stove, if Holland has one, 6 to 8. Pipe and elbows, 3. Winter fuel, 4 to 6 cords of dry oak, and that is if the walls do not leak. If the walls leak, 8 cords, maybe more. He waited. Alma said nothing. What do you have? Quaid asked. $3, Alma said. 1 blanket, half a loaf. Quaid looked at Deputy Teague. Teague looked at the ground. A cellar, Quaid said, is for potatoes, not girls. You will wake wet, then cold, then not wake at all. I've seen it. The cold does not argue. It does not negotiate. It finds the gap and it comes inside and it stays. Alma's jaw was clenched so tight her teeth ached. She wanted to ask what he expected her to do with this information. She wanted to ask where she should go with no money, no kin, and a discharged ledger that called her able-bodied. But asking would confirm what Quaid already believed, that she was a poor farm girl standing beside a hole, and the hole was her future either way. The county, Quaid said, straightening, is no longer responsible after sundown. He turned and walked back toward the road. Teague followed. Neither looked back. Alma watched them go. The sleet thickened. The light was already failing, and the depression at her feet held water in its lowest corner, black and still beneath the ice. She calculated what Quaid had calculated, and the numbers were the same. $28 for walls, 6 for a stove, 3 for pipe. 40 or 50 cords worth of labor to fell, split, and stack enough fuel to survive 5 months of Minnesota winter. She had $3. She had a cracked shovel. She had roughly 10 weeks before the deep cold locked the ground so hard that digging became impossible and shelter became the difference between January and a pine box. The math was not close. The math was not even a question. The math was a verdict, and the verdict was the same one Quaid had delivered. This girl would fail, and the failure would not surprise anyone who knew the numbers. Alma dragged the blanket over her shoulders, climbed down into the depression, and began clearing ice from the lowest corner with the flat of the shovel blade. She was not building anything. She was not planning anything. She was doing the only thing left, moving dirt, because moving dirt was not dying, and not dying was the only task she could afford. She worked until the light was gone. Then she scraped a trench along the north side of the depression, deep enough to lie below the wind, and spread the blanket over a layer of dead grass she pulled from the hillside. The bread was half frozen. She ate a quarter of it and put the rest inside her coat. The ground was hard beneath her back and colder than the air, and she understood immediately what Quaid had meant. The earth did not warm to a body. The body warmed to the earth. She gave heat to the ground all night and received nothing in return. She woke before dawn with frost on the blanket edge. Her hands shook so badly she spilled half her water from the tin cup she had filled at the creek. Her hips ached where the frozen ground had pressed against bone through wool and grass. She sat up, pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and looked at the ruined cellar in the gray light. It was worse than she had thought. The collapsed timbers were punky and wet. The sod that had fallen inward was frozen into a single mass, and beneath it she could see the edge of what might have been a stone foundation, or might have been field stone rubble that meant nothing. The depression was a bowl that would hold every drop of rain and snow melt the hill could deliver. Quaid was right. A person could not live here. A person could only wait here, and waiting in Minnesota in October had a known outcome. Alma picked up the shovel anyway. She chose the deepest corner of the depression, the place where the frozen sod seemed thinnest, and began to dig. Not because she had a plan, because the alternative to digging was walking back to the county house and accepting whatever terms were offered, and the terms offered to an able-bodied poor farm girl with no family were domestic service under any arrangement that needed filling. She had seen the girls who went into service. Some came back for the Christmas charity meal. Most did not. She dug for 2 hours. The shovel blade, already cracked, struck rock twice and rang so hard her wrists ached. The frozen sod broke in slabs that weighed more than she expected, and she had to lever each one out with the handle braced against the rim. Sweat froze on her collar. Her breath came in short bursts that left white trails in the air. On the 3rd hour, the shovel hit something that was not rock. The sound was wrong. Fieldstone gave a grinding, gritty noise when struck. This was a clean ring, high-pitched, like tapping a fired pot. Alma knelt and brushed dirt with her bare hand. Beneath the frozen mud, she felt a surface too smooth for fieldstone, too regular for accident. She dug around it with her fingers, scraping until blood welled under 2 nails, and uncovered a curved course of polished brick, then another course beneath it. The brick was not rubble. It was laid in an arch. The mortar between the courses was hard, pale, and clean where the packed mud had protected it from weather. Alma pressed her palm flat against the exposed surface and felt the chill of fired clay, a cold that was different from the wet, biting cold of the mud around it. This was dry cold, stored cold, the kind of cold that came from depth rather than wind. A line of air touched her wrist. Faint, barely there, but moving. It came from a black gap under the fallen sod where the brick arch met the earth, and it carried a smell that was stale but not rotten, not the smell of standing water or decayed wood. The smell of closed air, of a room that had been sealed. Alma sat back on her heels. Her heart was beating in her throat. She remembered something. She remembered Dorothea Kipp at the poor farm. Dorothea, who had worked the kitchen and the cellar, and who tolerated Alma's presence below the floor because Alma was quiet and did not touch things without asking. Dorothea, who had once taken Alma's hand and pressed her small palm flat against the cellar wall, the deep wall, the one below the frost line, and said, "Feel that. The earth is slow. It remembers yesterday's weather. When the air above freezes, the ground below is still holding October. When the air above thaws, the ground below is still holding January. The earth does not hurry." Alma had been 10 years old. She had not understood the lesson, but she had remembered the temperature of that wall, cool in summer, warm in winter, constant in a way that nothing above ground ever was. She had filed it the way a child files things, without understanding, without forgetting. Now she held her palm against the exposed brick and felt the same steadiness. Not warm, not frozen. 50 degrees, maybe. The temperature of earth that was deep enough to ignore the sky. The logic arrived not as a plan, but as a series of observations that locked together. Above ground, she would have to fight wind on every wall. She had no lumber, no nails, no money for either. Below ground, 3 sides were already backed by earth. The earth was the wall. The earth was the insulation. The earth had been doing the work for free since before the Asen family built whatever this was. A vaulted brick arch could carry weight. She had seen the poor farm cellar hold tons of root vegetables overhead without cracking. If this arch was intact, the structure beneath it was stronger than any board shanty she could afford. A dry underground chamber could be heated with a fraction of the fuel a surface building required. Heat rose. In a buried room, the heat had nowhere to rise to. It stayed. And if air was moving through that black gap, if the faint breath on her wrist meant a vent or a flue existed somewhere in the buried structure, then the room had been designed not just for storage, but for habitation. Someone had built this to be entered, heated, and breathed in. Alma did not say any of this aloud. She did not have anyone to say it to. She simply picked up the shovel, positioned the blade at the edge of the exposed arch, and began to dig in earnest. By midday, she had cleared 2 feet of packed mud from the top of the arch and found 3 iron strap hinges still fixed to a buried door frame. The hinges were rusted but solid, hand forged, thick as her thumb, set into mortar that had not cracked. Beneath the door frame, a narrow brick stair descended into darkness. 9 steps. She could see 4 of them before the light gave out. She tied a candle stub to a length of twine she had pulled from the blanket edge, lit it with a match from the poor farm store she had hidden in her boot, and lowered it into the stairwell. The flame guttered once, then leaned sideways, not dying, but bending. Leaning toward the stair, then pulling upward toward a crack in the far wall she could not yet see. The candle did not go out. The air was moving. Something below was breathing. Alma heard boots on the frozen ground above and looked up. A woman stood at the rim of the depression, wrapped in a coat patched with flour sacking. 2 children pressed against her skirt. Beret Vangen, 37, widowed. She lived a quarter-mile east in a half-finished sod house with a roof that leaked when the wind came from the north, which in Minnesota meant it leaked most of the time. Beret held a heel of rye bread in one hand. She was not smiling. "I heard you were given the Assen lot," Beret said. "I was." Beret looked at the exposed brick, the cleared mud, the dark stairwell. "What is that?" "I do not know yet." Beret climbed down carefully, keeping her children behind her. She crouched beside the stair and looked at the candle still burning below. Her face changed. Not fear. Calculation. "Damp kills faster than cold," Beret said. "Underground is not shelter. Underground is a grave that takes longer." "I know," Alma said. "A room like that floods in spring. It floods in autumn if the drainage is wrong. It fills with smoke if there is no draw. It rots everything you own. It grows sickness in the walls." Alma scraped a patch of brick dry with her sleeve. She set the tin cup flat against the surface and held it there. Then she lifted it and showed Beret the inside of the cup. Dry, no seepage line, no condensation. "The brick is dry," Alma said. "The mortar is clean. There is a drainage groove cut into the floor. I can see the edge of it from the 3rd step." "A groove does not mean it works." "If the water had wanted this room," Alma said, "it would already be inside." Beret stared at her. Then she looked at the rye bread in her hand as if she had forgotten she was holding it. She set it on the rim of the excavation and stood. "You are going to die underground," Beret said, not with cruelty, with the flat certainty of a woman who had already buried a husband and understood that Minnesota did not negotiate. "Maybe," Alma said. She picked up the bread. "But I'm not going to die today." Beret took her children and left. Alma ate the bread slowly, crouched beside the dark stair, listening to the faint pull of air from below. The candles still burned. The flames still leaned. Whatever was down there had been sealed long enough to stay dry and open enough to breathe. She had a choice. She could spend her $3 on a night in town, a bed, a meal, a warm room, and be empty-handed by morning with nothing changed. Or she could spend every remaining hour of daylight reopening this vault and learn whether the earth was offering what the county had refused, a chance. Alma chose the second. She drove the cracked shovel into the mud beside the doorframe and pulled. By the 3rd day, the gossip had reached Holland's store. Darius Pike heard it while buying salt. Pike was 48, thin-faced, with the particular patience of a man who made his living buying tax liens and waiting for people to fail. He owned 6 parcels in Goodhue County, all acquired the same way. Attend the auction, bid low, wait for the original owner to miss a payment or abandon the land, then file for clear title. The Asen Cellar lot bordered a wagon path that Pike believed would matter when the new Creamery Road was cut through the township. He had expected to acquire it for back taxes. Instead, the county had given it to a poor farm girl as a discharge settlement, which meant Pike needed the girl to leave before he could file a claim of abandonment. "That girl bought a grave for $3, Pike said to the men at the counter. He said it the way a man drops a seed casually, knowing the ground would do the rest. The laughter spread. At Holland's store, at the blacksmith's, at the church steps after Sunday meeting. A teamster named Griff bet a plug of tobacco that Alma would last 3 nights after the first hard freeze. A churchwoman told Barre Vangen it would be kinder if Quaid took the deed back and placed the girl in service where she belonged. Barrett said nothing in reply, which the churchwoman interpreted as agreement, and which was not. Pike came to the lot on the 5th day. He stood at the rim and looked down at Alma, who was knee-deep in the excavation, hauling mud in a bucket she had traded for by scrubbing Holland's storeroom floor. "You are digging," Pike said. Alma did not look up. "I see brick," Pike said. "I see what used to be a cellar. You cannot live in a cellar, Miss Brecky. You cannot heat mud." Alma set the bucket on the rim, wiped her hands on her skirt, and looked at him. Her face was streaked with clay. Her fingernails were black. She had lost weight in 5 days because the bread was gone, and she was living on creek water and a handful of dried peas she had found in a sealed tin near the stair. "Then I will heat brick," she said. Pike's expression did not change. He had the face of a man who had heard many people say defiant things before they gave up. "County scrip is not worth full value at my counter," Pike said. "If you want stovepipe, I will give you 1 rusted elbow for $3. That is my price." "I do not need your pipe," Alma said. "You will," Pike said. "And when you do, the price will be higher." He left. Alma watched him walk back toward the road, and she understood something she had not understood before. Pike did not want her to survive. Pike wanted the land. Every day she stayed was a day his claim grew weaker, and a man who made his living on other people's failure did not tolerate delay well. She turned back to the excavation. The stair was fully exposed now, all 9 steps, the bottom 4 caked with mud but intact. The chamber below was still half filled with packed earth and debris, but she had cleared enough to stand inside, and what she had found made the hair on her arms rise. The vault was not a root cellar. It was larger, more deliberately built, and more complete than any root cellar she had seen at the poor farm. 12 feet wide, 18 feet long, 7 feet high at the crown of the brick arch. The walls were courses of fired brick laid in a pattern she did not recognize, not stacked flat, but angled, each course leaning into the next so that the arch held itself up through compression. The mortar was lime-based, hard as stone where it had stayed dry, and the floor was brick laid over gravel with the drainage channel cut along the base of the east wall, and it was not empty. On the 6th day, her shovel hit a ceramic lid sealed with wax and linen. Beside it, under a fallen plank, black stones spilled from a broken coal scuttle. Alma picked one up. It was dense, angular, and left a faint shine on her palm. She had handled coal at the poor farm, soft brown lignite that crumbled and smoked. This was different. This was hard, heavy, and clean-edged. Anthracite. She did not know the word, but she knew the weight. She kept digging. Behind a collapsed partition of rotten planking, she found the iron hulk of a box stove with a cracked mica window, a firebox wide enough for a split log, and a grate that was rusted but not broken. Beside the stove, wedged into a brick alcove, 5 sealed ceramic crocks sat in a row on a raised shelf, each one heavy and capped with wax. The cellar was not just a structure, it was a cache. Someone had built it, stocked it, sealed it, and then, for reasons Alma could not guess, abandoned it, or died before they could return, or been forgotten by a county that auctioned land without inspecting what lay beneath it. Alma sat on the bottom step and pressed her palms to her knees to stop them from shaking. She was filthy, starving, and so tired that the edges of her vision blurred when she stood too fast. But for the first time since Quaid had walked away, the math had changed. Not enough. Not yet. But the numbers were no longer a verdict. They were a question. She had coal. She had a stove. She had brick walls that held back the earth and a drainage channel that kept the floor dry. She had sealed crocks that might contain anything, spoiled food, lamp oil, grease, nothing useful at all. She had an arch that might hold or might collapse the first time weight pressed on it from above. She had air moving through the chamber, which meant a flue or vent existed somewhere in the structure, which meant fire was possible without suffocation, which meant heat was possible without lumber. She also had Pike watching from the road, Quaid's verdict ringing in her ears, Beret's warning about damp and death, and roughly 8 weeks before the ground froze so hard that any repair she had not finished would remain unfinished until spring, if she lived until spring. That night, Alma slept underground for the first time. She spread the blanket on the cleared section of brick floor, set the candle in a niche in the wall, and lay down with the cracked shovel across her chest because she had nothing else that felt like protection. The vault was cold, not the cutting, wind-driven cold of the surface, but a steady mineral cold that pressed against her from every direction equally. 39 degrees by her best guess, cold enough to see her breath, warm enough that the frost did not form on the blanket. Above her, the brick arch curved in the candlelight, solid and dark and older than anything she had ever slept beneath. The air moved. She could hear it, a faint, steady whisper through the crack where the flue met the wall, pulling the candle flames sideways in a rhythm that was almost like breathing. The earth was slow, Dorothea had said. It remembers yesterday's weather. Alma closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would open the crocks. Tomorrow she would test the stove. Tomorrow she would find out whether the flue drew or whether the room that might save her would fill with smoke and poison instead. But tonight, for the first time in 5 days, the wind could not reach her. Above ground, sleet turned to ice on the rim of the excavation, and 2 boys Pike had sent to shout into the cellar. Mouth arrived to find nothing but a dark hole and silence. One of them kicked a bank of frozen dirt loose, and it tumbled down the stair and nearly buried the entrance. They laughed, called out something about graves, and left. Alma heard the dirt fall. She heard the laughter. She did not move. She lay in the dark with her hand on the shovel and waited until the sound of boots faded, and then she got up, climbed the 9 steps, and spent the next 3 hours in the dark, digging out the entrance while sleet turned to ice on her back and her fingers bled through the rags she had wrapped around them. By morning, the stair was clear. Her hands were ruined. The temperature had dropped again, and the creek where she filled her cup had a shelf of ice that took 3 strikes with the shovel handle to break. She was standing at the top of the stair, wringing blood and water from the rags on her hands, when she heard a sound she did not expect. A tap, metal on brick, coming from below. Alma picked up the shovel and descended. At the bottom of the stair, in the half-cleared chamber lit by the stub of her last candle, a woman stood with a mason's hammer in one hand and the other palm flat against the vaulted wall. She was 66 years old, German-born, with hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood as axe handles. She wore a coat too thin for the weather and boots that had been resoled twice. Dorothea Kipp turned from the wall and looked at Alma with an expression that was not surprise. It was assessment. "Who laid this arch?" Dorothea asked. Alma stared. "I do not know." Dorothea tapped the nearest brick course with the hammer. The sound rang clean and high. a note that hung in the cold air like a bell struck once. "Good bond," Dorothea said. "The mortar held." She moved 2 feet along the wall and tapped again. This time, the note was duller, flatter. She marked the spot with a piece of charcoal she pulled from her pocket. "That joint is cracked," Dorothea said. "If you load weight above it, the course will slip." She looked at Alma. "You cannot guess which joints are bad. You have to listen." "How did you find me?" Alma asked. "The whole town is talking about the poor farm girl in the hole," Dorothea said. "I came to see if the hole was worth dying in." She tapped another brick. "Clean ring." She moved on. "I have not decided yet." Tell us in the comments, have you ever been doubted by someone who did not understand what you were building? Dorothea worked her way along the full length of the east wall, tapping every third course. She found 4 bad joints and marked each one. Then she crouched at the drainage channel and ran her finger along the groove cut into the brick. "This was not a root cellar," Dorothea said. "Root cellars do not have flue channels. Root cellars do not have coal bays." She stood and pointed at the alcove where the crocks sat. "Someone built this for winter. Someone who understood brick, understood draft, and understood that the ground does not freeze at 7 feet. She turned to Alma. "You found the coal?" "I found it." "Have you opened the crocks?" "Not yet." "Good. Do not open them until I am here." Dorothea set the mason's hammer on the nearest shelf. "If they are sealed with wax, they may still hold. If they are cracked, whatever is inside has turned. The difference between useful and poison is the seal." She climbed the stair without looking back. At the top, she paused. "I knew you at the farm," Dorothea said. "You were the only child who noticed where the air went." Then she was gone. Her footprints in the mud led east toward the road, and the mason's hammer sat on the shelf where she had left it, gleaming dully in the candlelight. Alma stood alone in the vault. The candle flame leaned sideways in its steady, breathing rhythm. The 4 charcoal marks on the wall told her where the arch was weak. The coal scuttle sat in the corner, black and heavy and full of heat she had not yet lit. The stove waited behind its cracked mica window. Above her, Pike's boys had tried to bury the entrance. Below her, the brick held. The drainage channel was dry. The air moved, and someone who knew masonry had left a hammer and promised to come back. Alma looked at the stair, then at the stove, then at the sealed crocks she had been told not to open. The chamber was cold and dark and smelled of earth and old mortar and the faintest trace of coal dust, and it was more shelter than she had owned in 19 years of living. 8 weeks until deep winter. 4 bad joints in the arch. A stove she had not tested. A flue she had not traced. A town that expected her to die. A man who wanted her land. And a woman with a mason's hammer who had asked the only question that mattered. Who built this and why? The candle guttered. Alma reached for the shovel. She had work to do. Dorothea came back the next morning with a kettle of boiled oats and a question. "Which way did the candle bend?" Alma was on her knees at the base of the stair, scraping mud from the 4th step with a flat stone because the shovel blade had finally cracked in half. She did not look up. "Toward the stair first," Alma said. "Then up, toward the east wall, near the top course." Dorothea set the kettle on the rim and climbed down. She lit a tallow stub, held it near the floor, and watched the flame lean. Then she moved it to the center of the chamber. The flame straightened. She raised it overhead, near the arch crown, and the flame bent hard toward a crack in the upper east wall where mortar had fallen away to reveal a dark channel behind the brick. "There is your flue," Dorothea said. Whoever built this ran a channel through the wall to a vent above ground. The draw is weak because the top is blocked. Snow, dirt, a bird nest, something sealed it. But the path is there. She turned to Alma. I came back because you answered correctly. Most people would have said the candle leaned toward the door, because that is where they think air comes from. You noticed it went up. That means you watch before you guess. Alma ate the oats standing. They were lukewarm and unsalted, and the best thing she had tasted in 8 days. Dorothea did not sit. She did not make conversation. She picked up the mason's hammer and began tapping the arch again, this time working the west wall, course by course, marking bad joints with charcoal. By midday, she had mapped 11 weak points across both walls. 7 could be patched with lime mortar. 4 needed brick replaced entirely, courses where frost had cracked the face, and water had softened the mortar behind it. You need lime, Dorothea said. Sand, a bucket that does not leak. And you need to clear this chamber before you touch the stove, because if you light a fire in a room full of loose dirt, the dust will catch and you will burn underground. She said it the way a person states a measurement. No drama, no warning tone, just the fact and the consequence placed side by side. They began the next day. Dorothea showed Alma how to slake a small batch of lime in the iron kettle, a fistful of quickite from Holland's store, bought with a day's labor sweeping the storeroom, mixed with creek water and left to heat until it steamed. The smell was sharp and chemical, and Dorothea made Alma tie a rag over her nose and mouth before stirring. Lime burns skin, Dorothea said. It burns eyes. It burns lungs if you breathe the dust dry, but it seals brick better than anything God or man has made, and it has been sealing brick since before your grandmother's grandmother was born. They mixed sand from the creek bank into the slaked lime and pressed the mortar into the charcoal-marked joints with a spoon handle where a trowel could not reach. The mortar was stiff and cold and fought their fingers, and Alma's split palms opened again every time she pressed too hard. Dorothea did not comment on the blood. She handed Alma a strip of linen from her own coat hem and kept working. By the 3rd day of repair, 4 joints were sealed. By the 5th, 7. The 4 that needed new brick would have to wait. Alma had no brick to replace them with, and Dorothea said the existing courses would hold through one winter if the load above them did not shift. Do not pile anything on the ground over those marks, Dorothea said. No soil, no stone, no firewood. The arch carries weight through compression. If you add weight above a weak joint, the joint does not crack slowly. It lets go at once, and you will not hear it before it lands on you. Alma marked the danger spots on the floor with charcoal X's and memorized their positions relative to the stair. The chamber took shape. They cleared mud and debris, bucket by bucket, Alma hauling, Dorothea sorting. Broken timber went to the surface for eventual kindling. Loose brick was stacked near the stair for future repair. The iron stove, too heavy for Alma to move alone, was dragged to the center of the chamber on a sled of planks that Dorothea built from the collapsed partition, then lifted onto 3 flat stones that raised the firebox 6 inches above the brick floor. Never set iron on brick, Dorothea said. The heat cracks the floor, and cracked floor lets water in from below. Stone between, always stone between. The stove had a problem. The grate was intact, but the door hung crooked on a bent hinge pin, and the mica window was cracked so badly that a coal fire would leak smoke through the gap. Alma could not fix it. Dorothea could not fix it. They needed a blacksmith. Niels Solheim was 28, broad across the shoulders, quiet in the way that men who work hot metal all day are quiet, not from shyness, but from the habit of listening to the sound of iron rather than the sound of conversation. His forge sat at the edge of Red Wing, and Pike owed him money for a gate repair Pike had disputed. When Alma appeared at the forge door and asked what it would cost to patch a stove grate and straighten a hinge pin, Niels looked at her hands, the rags, the blackened nails, the raw skin, and asked what she was heating. "Brick," Alma said. Niels did not laugh. He asked how thick the walls were, how high the chamber, and whether the flue drew. Alma answered every question with numbers. Niels quoted his price. Clean the old brick from his forge foundation, stack it, and haul away the broken pieces. Labor for labor. No scrip. No cash. Pike heard about the trade within a day and sent word that anyone doing business with the poor farm girl was choosing sides. Niels sent word back that he chose the side that paid on time. He patched the grate with a strap of forge iron, straightened the hinge pin, and forged a new latch for the door from a scrap of wagon spring. He carried the parts to the cellar himself and fitted them while Alma held the stove steady. "The draft will tell you everything," Niels said, tightening the latch. "If the fire burns blue at the base, the air is moving. If it burns yellow and lazy, the flue is choking. If the smoke comes back at you instead of going up, shut the stove and get out. Coal smoke is not wood smoke. You cannot see it the same. You cannot smell it the same. And by the time you feel it, you are already too slow to climb the stairs." He said it without looking at her, the way he might warn someone about a hot handle, a fact, not a kindness. Alma marked it the way she marked everything Dorothea taught her, silently, permanently. The flue was the hardest problem. Dorothea traced the channel through the east wall by holding a candle at the base and watching the smoke travel upward through the brickwork. The channel was roughly 4 inches wide, lined with fire brick, and rose at a shallow angle through the wall before turning vertical somewhere above the arch crown. The outlet was buried. They could see the sky through the channel from inside, but only as a faint gray disk the size of a coin, which meant dirt and roots had nearly sealed the top. Alma spent 2 days on the surface, digging above the estimated flue line, following the angle Dorothea had calculated by measuring the channel's rise per course of brick. She found the vent cap on the second afternoon, a flat stone set over a brick collar, packed with frozen mud and threaded with dead grass roots. She cleared it, lifted the stone, and heard the chamber below exhale. A column of stale air rose from the opening, and from inside Dorothea shouted that the candle flame had jumped sideways so hard it nearly blew out. The flue drew. They tested the stove that evening. Alma laid a small bed of kindling, dry splinters from the broken partition, and set 3 chunks of anthracite on top. She struck a match. The kindling caught. The coal did not. It sat black and inert while the kindling burned to ash beneath it. "Coal does not catch from kindling," Dorothea said. "Coal catches from heat. You need a bed of coals first, wood coals, hot enough to glow. Then the anthracite will light. And when it lights, it burns differently from anything you have known. Slow, intense, almost no flame. The heat comes from the stone itself, not from fire above it." Alma rebuilt the fire. Wood first, then a layer of hot coals, then 3 pieces of anthracite placed on top. She closed the stove door and opened the grate vent. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then a blue line appeared at the base of the nearest chunk, a thin, fierce ribbon of color that was not flame, but something closer to light, trapped inside the coal. The heat hit Alma's face from 3 feet away. The stove pipe, a length of salvaged iron Dorothea had brought from a collapsed shed near her old homestead, carried the smoke into the wall channel. The draft pulled hard. The chamber, which had been 39 degrees when they started, climbed to 47 in the first hour. By the second hour, 54. The brick walls absorbed the heat and held it, radiating warmth evenly from every surface. Alma pressed her palm to the wall and felt it, not warm in the way a stove is warm, but present, a steady, even heat that came from inside the brick itself, as if the stone had remembered what fire was and was slowly repeating the lesson. But the first test nearly killed the second. On the second night of burning, ash choked the grate. Alma woke with the coal bed dim and the chamber cooling, the temperature already falling back through the 40s. Her breath was visible. She knelt at the stove in the dark. The candle had burned out while she slept, and felt for the grate. Ash had packed solid beneath the coal bed, cutting off airflow from below. The fire was suffocating. She remembered what Dorothea had said about clearing ash from beneath, not above. She found the ash hook by touch, worked it under the grate, and dragged the packed ash forward into the firebox tray. The coal bed shifted. For a moment she thought the whole fire would collapse and go dark. Then a thin blue line reappeared at the base, and the draft caught, and the blue flame spread across the remaining coal like a whisper being repeated. By morning, the chamber was 51 degrees. Alma's hands were gray with ash, and her lungs hurt from the dust she had breathed in the dark. But the fire was alive, and the walls were warm. Dorothea arrived at dawn. She inspected the ash, the grate, the flue draw, and the soot line on the pipe. She said nothing about the near failure. She said, "How long did the coal burn before the ash packed?" 12 hours, maybe 13. Then you clear ash every 10. Set it in your body. Every 10 hours you wake, you clear, you check the draft, you check the candle. If the candle dims, the air is wrong. If the air is wrong, you open the vent cap before you touch the stove. Air first. Always air first. She made Alma practice the sequence 5 times. Wake, check the draft, shake ash, touch the pipe for temperature, test the candle, open the vent if needed. Alma performed it with her eyes closed on the 5th repetition. Dorothea watched without comment, then said the only thing she said about competence the entire time Alma knew her. "You will not die from forgetting. You will die from being too tired to remember. That is why you practice when you are awake, so your hands remember when your mind does not." The days shortened. October became November. The vault was no longer a grave. It was a room, lime-washed brick walls. A cot frame Niels had welded from salvage iron, set on blocks to keep the bedding off the cold floor. 2 shelves made from the least rotten planks of the old partition. The coal bin sorted and stacked, anthracite on the left, wood scraps for starting on the right. The 5 sealed crocks on the upper shelf, their wax caps intact. Dorothea had opened them one by one under controlled conditions, and what they found changed the math again. Each crock held roughly 30 to 40 pounds of rendered bear fat, clean, white, and hard beneath the wax seal. Not rancid, not spoiled, sealed well enough that the fat had kept its structure and its smell. Faintly animal, faintly sweet, nothing like rot. "Lamp oil," Dorothea said, sniffing the first crock. "Boot grease. Stove starting if you mix it with lint. Emergency food if you're dying and nothing else exists, but only then. This is not butter. This is fuel." They made a lamp from a tin cup, a twist of cotton rag, and a spoonful of bear fat. The flame was yellow, steady, and brighter than tallow. It smoked if the wick was too high, but trimmed low it gave enough light to read by. Not that Alma had anything to read. The fat burned slower than tallow, and did not stink the way lard did. It was, in its quiet way, the most useful thing in the vault. The stove performance, measured through Dorothea's method of leaving a cup of water at different heights and checking whether it froze overnight, was better than anything above ground within a mile. Outside before dawn, 8 degrees above zero. Vault without fire, 39 degrees. Vault after 2 hours of small coal fire, 54 degrees. One scuttle of anthracite lasted longer than a basket of oak scraps and threw less ash. Quaid came back. He stood at the top of the stair and looked down at the lime-washed walls, the glowing stove, the shelf of crocks, the woman standing in what had been a hole in the earth 2 months before. He descended slowly, using his cane on each step. He touched the wall. He looked at the thermometer Dorothea had hung from a nail, 58 degrees. He asked how much fuel she had burned. Alma showed him less than 2 scuttles in 3 days. "I told you a cellar was not for living," Quaid said. He waited. Alma said nothing. "This is not a cellar," Quaid said quietly, almost to himself. But he did not say he was wrong. Not yet. He said, "Survival is not measured on a calm morning, Miss Brecka. You have not seen January." He left. Beret came the next day, without her children, and sat on the cot for 20 minutes without speaking. She admitted it was warmer than her sod wall. She refused to bring Tolliff and the younger child underground. "I will not bury my children before they are dead," she said, and climbed the stair with her jaw set. Pike filed a complaint with the county clerk, claiming the coal and crocks were improvements attached to a tax parcel and therefore improperly transferred. The clerk told Pike to hire a lawyer. Pike did not hire a lawyer. He hired pressure instead, a whisper campaign that Alma was concealing valuable county goods in a hole, like a thief. The weather turned soft. Snow melted from eaves at noon. Men left coats open. Children played outside without mittens. The Mississippi fog crept up the bluffs in the morning and burned off by 10. It felt like reprieve. It felt like mercy. Dorothea did not trust it. "When January starts warm," she said, "January ends with teeth." She made Alma run a night drill, full sequence. Wake, check draft, shake ash, touch pipe, test candle, open vent. Alma performed it in the dark, by touch, in under 4 minutes. Dorothea timed her with a pocket watch that had belonged to her dead husband. "Faster," Dorothea said. Alma ran it again. 3 minutes. "A room that saves you on Tuesday," Dorothea said, "can kill you on Thursday if you stop listening." Alma did not sleep well that night. Not because of the cold. The vault was 53 degrees with a banked fire, but because the softness of the weather felt like a lie, and she had learned at the poor farm that lies were always louder just before the truth arrived. January 12th, 1888, began with dripping eaves. The temperature at dawn was 34 degrees above zero, warm enough that Alma left the stove vent half closed to conserve coal. The sky was gray but not heavy. The wind was gentle from the south, a January wind that felt like March, felt like forgiveness, felt like a season that had decided to be kind. It was none of those things. Alma went to Beret's at mid-morning to return a kettle she had borrowed. The walk was easy. The ground was soft underfoot, and she could hear meltwater running under the snow crust along the fence line. Beret's sod house was a quarter-mile east, and when Alma arrived, the door was open. Beret stood inside with her hands pressed flat on the table and her face the color of chalk. "Tolliff has not come back," Beret said. Tolliff was 9. He had walked to the school lane that morning because the weather was warm enough, because the teacher had sent word that attendance would be counted, because a 9-year-old boy in January will always choose the road over the house if the sun is out. The school was a mile and a half north. He should have been back by 11. It was past noon. "The sky changed," Beret said. She pointed south. Alma looked. The horizon was wrong. The gray had darkened into a wall, not clouds in the usual sense, not the slow gathering of a storm, but a line. A physical, visible line across the southern sky, advancing toward them like a wave seen from shore. Beneath the line, the air was black. Above it, the soft gray of a January thaw. The line moved fast. Alma could see it eating distance. How long? Alma asked. Minutes, Beret said. Maybe less. Alma tied the kettle rope around her waist, looping it through the belt of her coat, and knotted the other end to Beret's fence post. She took the remaining length of rope, 30 feet maybe, and began walking north toward the school lane, keeping one hand on the wire fence that ran along the property line. The wall hit before she reached the end of the wire. It did not arrive as wind first, or snow first, or cold first. It arrived as sound. A roar that came from every direction at once, as if the air itself had been struck. Then the wind, and the wind was not wind but weight, a physical force that hit Alma's chest and pushed her backward 2 steps before she braced her legs. Then the snow, and the snow was not falling but flying horizontally, so dense that Alma could not see her own hand at the end of her extended arm. The temperature dropped. She felt it in her lungs first. The air turned from cool to cutting between one breath and the next. Her nostrils stung. Her eyes watered and the tears froze on her cheeks before they reached her jaw. She had walked in Minnesota cold her entire life. She had never felt anything like this. This was not cold weather. This was cold as a weapon, aimed, fast, and purposeful. She clung to the fence wire and pulled herself forward hand over hand. The wire cut through her mittens. The wind pressed the coat against her body so hard she could feel every rib. She could not hear her own voice. She shouted Tolef's name, and the wind took the sound and shredded it. 20 feet past the end of Beret's fence, the wire ended. Alma's hand closed on the post, and there was nothing beyond it. Open ground. No guide. The snow was so thick she could not tell which direction she faced. She could not see the sky. She could not see the ground. She stood in a white void that roared. She kept the rope taut behind her, her lifeline back to Beret's fence, and took 10 steps into the void, sweeping her free arm ahead of her like a blind woman searching for a wall. On the 8th step, her boot hit something solid. She reached down. An overturned sled, half buried in fresh drift. Behind the sled, 2 shapes huddled together so tightly they looked like one. Tolef Vangen, 9 years old, coughing so hard his entire body shook. And beside him, Jem Croy, 11, Darius Pike's hired boy, with his hands tucked inside his coat, and his face blue-white and blank, with the particular stillness of a child who has stopped understanding what is happening. Alma grabbed Tolef's collar and pulled. He came loose from the snow like a root pulled from mud. Jem did not move. She seized his arm and dragged. He was heavier than she expected, a big boy, farm strong but limp with cold. She got both children to their feet and turned back toward the rope. The rope was taut. She followed it, one hand on the line, the other gripping Tolef's coat, shouting at Jem to hold Tolef's belt and not let go. They stumbled through the white noise. Alma counted steps, 30 feet of rope, 30 feet back to the fence. From the fence, she could follow the wire to Beret's house. But the wind was wrong. It had shifted. The rope led south-southeast, and Beret's house was east. Following the rope would take them to the fence post. But from the fence post to Beret's door was another 100 yards of open ground, with the wind now hitting them broadside. Alma had walked that 100 yards an hour ago in calm air. In this wind, carrying 2 half-frozen children, it might as well be a mile. The vault was closer. The vault was due south, downhill, less than 200 yards from where the rope was tied. Downhill meant the wind would push them instead of fighting them. Downhill meant gravity was an ally. Downhill meant the buried stair, the brick walls, the stove, the coal, the bare fat lamp, the room that the earth had been holding warm for months while the sky decided to kill everything above it. Alma pulled the rope free from the fence post, looped it around her waist again, and turned south. She put Tolef between herself and Jem, locked her arm around the smaller boy's chest, and walked into the wind at an angle that let it push them downhill instead of sideways. She could not see. She navigated by slope. The ground fell toward the creek, and the cellar was on the far side of the creek against the hill. She found the creek by falling into it. The ice had held that morning, but the wind had driven snow into the channel and packed it, and Alma's boot broke through into 6 inches of water so cold it felt like stepping on a blade. She pulled both children across, soaking Jem to the knee, and climbed the far bank on her hands and knees. The hill. The cellar was against the hill. She felt the ground rise and followed it, dragging Tolef, shouting at Jem though she could not hear her own voice. Her free hand swept the ground ahead of her. Snow, frozen dirt, more snow, and then the edge of the excavation. The rim she had dug 2 months ago, now half buried, but still there. Her fingers found the first step. She pushed Tolef down the stair. The boy slid more than walked, landing at the bottom in a heap. Alma shoved Jem after him and heard the dull sound of a body hitting brick. Then she went down herself, backward, pulling snow and wind with her until the walls of the stair closed around her, and the roar above became a moan, and the air inside the vault was still. Cold. The stove had been banked. 41 degrees. But still. No wind. No horizontal snow. No sound except 3 people breathing and the faint pull of air through the flue. Alma stripped Tolef's wet coat and boots. She stripped Jem's soaked trousers from the knee down. She wrapped both children in the wool blanket and set them against the east wall, away from the stove, away from the stair where cold air poured in. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the match twice before it struck. The kindling caught. She had a handful of dry splinters ready. She always had kindling ready. Dorothea had drilled that into her until it was reflex. She laid the splinters in the firebox, blew gently until the flame spread, and set 3 chunks of anthracite on the wood coals. The coals sat inert. The blue line did not appear. Tolef's lips were the color of slate. Jem had stopped shivering, which was worse. Alma opened the grate vent. She took a spoonful of bear fat from the nearest crock and smeared it on a twist of cotton rag. She lit the rag and pushed it under the coal bed. The fat caught with a low yellow flame that threw heat upward into the anthracite. She closed the door and waited. 10 seconds. 20. The draft pulled. The blue line appeared, thin, fierce, crawling along the base of the first coal chunk like a living thing finding its grip. The temperature began to climb. Then the smoke came back, not gradually, not as a wisp. A wall of gray-white smoke rolled out of the stovepipe joint and filled the upper third of the chamber in under a minute. The flue had stopped drawing. Something had sealed the outlet, driven snow, ice, debris thrown by the wind, and the coal gas that had been rising through the channel was now falling back into the room. If you are invested in this story, subscribe and stay with us, because what happens next changes everything. Alma's eyes burned. She could taste the smoke, not wood smoke, which was sharp and familiar, but coal smoke, which was thin and sweet and carried the sleeping poison Niels had warned her about, carbon monoxide. She did not know the name. She knew the effect. Dorothea had told her, "You feel warm, then sleepy, then nothing." She looked at the children. Tolef was coughing again, which meant he was breathing. Jem was still. She handed Tolef the bare fat lamp and said the only word she could manage through the smoke. "Keep this low. If the flame shrinks, call me." Then she climbed the stairs into the blizzard. The wind hit her like a fist. She went to her knees on the first step above ground and stayed there, crawling because standing was not possible. The rope was still tied to her waist. She tied the other end to the stair post, the oak brace Dorothea had showed her how to wedge, and crawled east along the surface of the hill toward the buried flue line. She could not see the vent cap. She could not see anything. She crawled by memory, counting bricks laid along the surface that she had placed as markers during the dig. 1 brick, 2 bricks. The 3rd brick should mark the vent. She swept the ground with her hand and found nothing but packed snow. She dug with her fingers. The broken shovel, she had left it by the stair. She had nothing to dig with but her hands. A shape appeared in the whiteout. A man. He grabbed the rope and nearly pulled Alma sideways. She felt his weight and his panic before she could see his face. Darius Pike, coatless, gloveless, stumbling blind across the hillside. He had been searching for Jem. He had been caught in the open. He had followed the sound of nothing toward the light of nothing and found a rope by accident. Pike's hands were white. His voice was gone. He mouthed words Alma could not hear over the wind. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward her and screamed into his ear, "Hold the rope. Do not move." Pike gripped the rope with both hands. His fingers were so stiff he could barely close them. Alma crawled past him, following the buried marker bricks, and found the vent cap 3 feet ahead. The flat stone was still in place, but a foot of driven snow had packed over it and frozen into a crust that her bare hands could not break. She pulled the broken shovel blade from her belt, the half she had kept, the jagged iron piece she had not thrown away because a poor farm girl does not discard metal, and drove it into the ice over the vent cap. Once, twice. The crust cracked. She cleared the snow with her forearms and lifted the stone. The vault exhaled. A column of warm air and smoke erupted from the vent and was instantly shredded by the wind. But the draw was restored. She could feel it. The pull of air from below, sucking fresh air down the stair and up through the flue, carrying the poison out of the room where 2 children sat in the dark. She crawled back to Pike. She pulled him to the stair. He resisted. Even now, even blinded by wind, even freezing, even knowing his hired boy was underground, Pike resisted entering the vault because entering the vault meant Alma was right and he was wrong, and the grave he had mocked was the only room in Goodhue County that could keep him alive tonight. Alma did not argue. She let go of his wrist and descended the stairs. Behind her, she heard Pike stand in the wind for 3 more seconds. Then she heard him follow. Inside, the smoke had cleared. The draft pulled so hard the fire roared blue through the mica window, throwing a fierce light across the brick walls. The temperature was climbing 44, 48, 52. Alma checked the children. Tolliff was awake, coughing, wrapped in the blanket. The lamp was still lit. Jem had not moved. Alma knelt beside Jem. The boy was breathing, but his shivering had stopped. His skin was cold and waxy. She remembered Dorothea's warning. Stillness can be worse than shaking. When the body stops trying to warm itself, the body has begun to quit. She pulled stones from the wall niche, smooth cobbles she had gathered from the creek bank weeks ago, for exactly this purpose, because Dorothea had told her that dry-heated stones hold warmth longer than any cloth. She set 3 stones near the stove, waited until they were hot enough to sting her palm through a rag, wrapped them in strips of linen, and placed them by Jem's feet and against his stomach. Never on bare skin, never directly. She watched. 1 minute, 2, 5. Jem shivered, a violent full-body tremor that shook the blanket and rattled his teeth. Alma nearly cried. She bit her lip until it bled instead, because crying used energy she did not have. Pike sat against the far wall. He did not speak. He stared at the coal bin, the coal he had tried to claim by law, the coal that was now the only reason his hired boy's heart was still beating, The bare fat lamp burned between them, steady and yellow, filling the vault with the smell of rendered fat and warm brick, and the sharp mineral scent of anthracite doing the thing it was made to do. Above them, the blizzard buried the stair. Snow packed over the entrance until no light came down the steps. The vault became a sealed room underground, brick walls, brick arch, brick floor, iron stove, coal fire, 2 children, 2 adults, and the slow, patient warmth of the earth holding them inside itself, while the sky tried to kill everything above. The temperature at midnight, 56 degrees inside. Outside, the mercury had fallen below measurement. Martin Lunde, Alma's neighbor to the northwest, survived only because he broke through the door of his own hayshed and buried himself in straw. His hired man lost 2 fingers and the feeling in both feet. An abandoned wagon was found the next morning with a frozen horse still in the traces. Alma did not sleep. She ran Dorothea's sequence every 2 hours. Check draft, shake ash, touch pipe, test candle, open vent. The fire held, the walls held, the arch held, the bare fat lamp burned without flickering. At 3 in the morning, Tolliff asked for water, and Alma melted snow from the stair in the tin cup set near the stove. At dawn, the wind dropped. The silence was so sudden it woke Pike, who had fallen asleep against the wall with his arms wrapped around his chest. Alma climbed the buried stair, pushed through 2 feet of packed snow, and broke into a world that was white, still, and 22 degrees below zero. The sky was clear. The sun was a white disk low on the horizon. Nothing moved. The fence line was buried. Beret's roof was a white mound. The landscape had been erased and redrawn in a single color, and the only evidence that anything lived below the surface was a thin wisp of coal smoke rising from the vent cap on the hillside, barely visible against the white sky. Inside the vault, the lamp still burned. The coal bed still lived. The brick was dry. The children were breathing. Pike sat where he had sat all night, staring at the iron stove that had held a blue flame for 14 hours on less than 2 scuttles of the coal he had called stolen. Alma stood at the top of the stair with the cold pressing against her face and the warm air rising from below, and she did not say anything because there was nothing to say that the vault had not already said. The grave had held. The town had not seen it yet. Pike had. And Pike knew that the room he had mocked contained more value than anything he owned above ground. They dug her out at mid-morning. Quaid arrived first, walking behind a team of horses that had broken a path through the drifts from Red Wing. Deputy Teague came behind him, then Niels Solheim with a Ford shovel over his shoulder, then Beret Vangen wrapped in every piece of cloth she owned, her younger child strapped to her back, and her face so white it looked like part of the snow. Beret had not slept. She had spent the night in the sod house with the door barricaded, burning her last oak scraps in the stove, holding her younger child against her chest, and listening to the wind try to pull the roof off. She had not known where Tolliff was. She had not known if he was alive. She had last seen Alma walking north along the fence line with a kettle rope around her waist, and then the wall had hit and the world had gone white, and Beret had shut the door because she had 1 child left, and 1 child was better than none. Now she stood at the rim of the excavation and watched Niels drive the Ford shovel into the packed snow that buried the stair. The snow was 2 feet deep over the entrance, hard crusted, and Niels worked through it in layers, throwing each slab aside. Quaid said nothing. Teague held the horses. Beret did not blink. Niels cleared the top step, then the second. On the 3rd step, the snow gave way to warm air, and a smell rose out of the stairwell that made Quaid take a step backward. Coal smoke, bear fat, wet wool, lime-washed brick, and the close mineral warmth of a room that had been heated all night while the surface froze. It was the smell of life coming from underground, and it was so wrong against the white stillness of the landscape that every person standing at the rim went quiet. Alma appeared at the base of the stair, ash on her face, soot in her hair, the stove poker in her right hand. Behind her, in the yellow light of the bare, fat lamp, Tullif sat on the cot wrapped in the wool blanket. Jem Croy sat beside him. Both boys were alive. Beret made a sound, not a word, a sound that came from a place below language, and she went down the stairs so fast Niels had to catch her arm to keep her from slipping on the ice. She reached Tullif and pulled him against her and held him, and Tullif said, "Mama, it is warm in here." And Beret pressed her face into his hair and could not speak. Quaid descended the stairs slowly. He ducked under the arch and stood in the vault for the first time, and the room he entered was not the room he had imagined. It was not a grave. It was not a hole. It was a chamber with lime-washed walls that glowed in the lamplight, a brick floor swept clean, a coal stove throwing steady heat through a mica window, shelves with sealed crocks, a cot on iron legs, and a thermometer hanging from a nail on the east wall. Quaid read the thermometer. 58 degrees. He removed his gloves. He pressed his palm flat against the brick, the same gesture Alma had made 2 months before when she first uncovered the arch. The wall was warm. Not surface warm like a stove, deep warm. The warmth came from inside the brick, from hours of coal heat absorbed and held and slowly released, and it radiated against his hand with a steadiness that no frame wall, no sod wall, no log wall he had ever built could match. "How much fuel?" Quaid asked. Alma pointed to the coal bin. Less than 2 scuttles gone. 14 hours of heat in the worst blizzard in a decade, and she had burned less coal than a farmhouse stove would consume in 4. Quaid looked at the bin. He looked at the stove. He looked at the walls, the drainage channel, the vent hole in the upper east corner where the flue entered the brickwork. He looked at the thermometer again, as if the number might have changed. "I told you a cellar was not for living," Quaid said. Alma held the stove poker at her side. She was too tired to be angry and too tired to be gracious. She waited. Quaid looked at her. Then he looked at the floor and shook his head once, slowly, the way a man does when the world has rearranged itself around a fact he cannot dispute. "I was wrong," Quaid said. He said it quietly. He said it in front of Niels, who stood at the base of the stair. He said it in front of Beret, who held Tullif against her. He said it in front of Deputy Teague, who had followed Quaid down and was staring at the stove as if he had never seen fire before. And he said it in front of Darius Pike, who sat against the far wall where he had sat all night, his white-tipped fingers tucked under his arms, his face closed and still. Quaid turned to Pike. "You filed a complaint about the coal," he said. Pike said nothing. "That complaint is withdrawn," Quaid said. It was not a question. Pike looked at Jem Croy, who was alive because of the coal. He looked at the iron stove he had tried to claim by law. He opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded once. Quaid climbed the stair without another word. Xiao. The next 3 days brought people Alma had never spoken to before. Niels came back that afternoon with the forged shovel and a sack of oats. He did not say the oats were a gift. He said he had too many, and his storage was getting mice. Alma cooked them on the stove and fed the boys, then Beret, then herself. The oats tasted like they had been made from something better than grain. Niels inspected the stove repair while the others ate. He tested the hinge pin, checked the grate, opened and closed the latch. He held his hand over the pipe joint and felt for leaks. He found none. "The draft held," Niels said. He said it the way he said everything, flatly, factually, as if reporting the temperature of iron. But his eyes moved across the vault with a different kind of attention. He was seeing the room the way a craftsman sees another craftsman's work, not the beauty of it, but the logic, the drainage channel, the raised cot, the stone pads under the stove, the coal sorted by size, the flue line traced through the east wall, everything placed where it served a purpose, and nothing where it did not. "Who designed this?" Niels asked. "Dorothea helped," Alma said. "The vault was already here. We made it work." Niels nodded. He left the forge shovel by the stair and told Alma she could keep it until the ground thawed. By the second day, Beret brought her younger child underground. She did not announce this as a change of position. She arrived with the boy on her hip and said, "His cough is worse in the sod house." She sat on the cot, looked at the warm walls, and said nothing else for an hour. When she left, she asked Alma a question she had never asked before. "How deep below frost line did you dig?" Alma told her. Beret nodded and carried her children home through the snow, and Alma understood that a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. Beret had brought her children into the vault. Beret, who had said she would not bury her children before they were dead. The room had answered the argument that words could not. A farmer named Griff, the same teamster who had bet a plug of tobacco that Alma would last 3 nights, appeared at the stair on the 3rd day. He removed his hat, which Alma had never seen him do, and asked how wide an arch could be before it needed a center post. Alma told him she did not know and that he should ask Dorothea. Griff said he did not know any Dorothea. Alma said, "You will." A church woman, the same one who had said Quaid should take the deed back, sent her husband to ask how the crocks had been sealed. Alma told him wax cap, linen underneath, tight lid pressed down while the wax was still soft. The man wrote it on his cuff and left. Quaid carried Alma's charcoal sketch. Drain first, air second, heat third, to a county meeting the following week. He did not ask Alma's permission. He did not credit Pike or the county or the Lord. He said, "The Brecka girl showed me this," and pinned the sketch to the meeting room wall with a tack. 3 farmers copied it before the meeting ended. Alma did not sell knowledge. She did not guard it. When people came, she answered. She drew diagrams on broken boards with charcoal. She showed them the drainage groove and the flue channel, and the raised cot and the stone pads under the stove. She told them what Dorothea had told her. The earth is slow, and it remembers yesterday's weather. If you work with that slowness instead of against it, the ground will do half the work for you. But she also told them what could kill them: damp without drainage, fire without draft, coal without ventilation, depth without a second air path, an arch loaded above a weak joint. She said it plainly, and she said it every time, because a buried room that saved one woman in January could bury another in February if the woman in February skipped the steps the woman in January had learned by nearly dying. Yelp. Dorothea returned 5 days after the blizzard. She walked from wherever she had sheltered, she did not say where, and Alma did not ask, and descended the stair without greeting. She did not praise Alma. She did not mention the children. She did not say she was glad everyone had lived. She checked the flue. She checked the ashtray. She checked the sump at the base of the drainage channel, dry, clear, no seepage. She checked the stones Alma had heated for Jem's feet and examined the linen wraps for scorch marks. There were none. She checked the bare fat lamp, which was burning low, and trimmed the wick with her thumbnail. Then she checked the thermometer, 56 degrees. Then she sat on the cot and said, "Tell me what went wrong." Alma told her. The smoke rollback, the sealed flue, the children's wet clothes, Jem's stillness, Pike in the whiteout, the broken shovel blade used to crack the ice over the vent, the bare fat smeared on cotton to start the coal, because the kindling alone had not been enough. Dorothea listened without interrupting. When Alma finished, Dorothea asked 3 questions. Did you check the draft before you lit the stove? Yes. Did you open the vent before you opened the stove door after the smoke rolled back? Alma hesitated. No. I went outside first. I cleared the vent from above. Why? Because the room was full of smoke and the children were inside. If I opened the vent from below, the smoke would have gone through me to get out. From above, the smoke went up and out, and the fresh air came down the stair. Dorothea said nothing for a long time. She was looking at Alma the way she had looked at the brick arch on the first day, testing, measuring, listening for the note that meant the bond had held. I would have done it the same way, Dorothea said. It was the closest she ever came to saying Alma had done well. They worked together through the rest of January and into February. Dorothea taught Alma to build a clean outdoor at the base of the flue, a small removable panel that allowed soot to be scraped from the channel without climbing to the vent cap. They cut a second vent shaft through the west wall, smaller than the first, with a hinged cap that could be opened from inside by a wire loop. If the primary flue blocked again, the second vent would keep air moving until the cap could be cleared. Alma marked the wall with coal-use notches. 1 scuttle for a mild night, 2 for hard wind, 3 only an emergency, a blizzard, a sick child, a night when the temperature dropped below the point where the Earth's insulation alone could keep the chamber above freezing. Dorothea's cough began in late February. At first it was a clearing sound, the kind that comes from lime dust and dry winter air. By March, it had deepened. By April, it had a rattle beneath it that Alma could hear from across the chamber. Dorothea did not mention it. She continued to work, patching mortar, testing draft, adjusting the stove grate. Her hands remained steady. Her eye remained sharp. Her patience with imprecision remained 0. But she moved slower. She climbed the 9 steps with pauses at the 5th and the 7th. She sat more often on the cot, not to rest but to teach from a seated position, as if standing while talking was a luxury she had decided to decline. In late April, with the snow melting and the creek running fast and the ground soft enough to dig again, Dorothea and Alma built a raised plank floor over brick sleepers in the sleeping alcove. The planks sat 2 inches above the masonry, creating an air gap that kept bedding from touching cold stone. It was the last construction project they completed together. Dorothea taught the way she had always taught, through action, through specifics, through the assumption that Alma was capable of understanding anything that was explained once. She did not soften lessons or repeat them. She demonstrated, she corrected, and she moved on. The warmth in the relationship was not spoken. It lived in the work, in the fact that Dorothea had come back after the blizzard not to see if Alma was alive, but to check the flue, because checking the flue was how Dorothea said she cared. On a warm evening in May of 1889, Dorothea sat on the cot and did not get up. Her breathing was shallow. The rattle had become a constant presence, not an interruption but a foundation, as if her lungs had rebuilt themselves around the sound. She asked Alma to bring her the mason's hammer. Alma brought it. Dorothea held it in both hands, turning it over, examining the head as if looking for a flaw she might have missed in 40 years of use. Oil the handle, Dorothea said. Bare grease, once a year, before the first freeze. The wood will split if you let it dry. Alma took the hammer. It was heavier than she remembered from the first day Dorothea had left it on the shelf, or she was more aware of its weight now, because the weight included everything that had been built with it, every brick that had been tested, every joint that had rung clean or cracked under its tap. The room did not save them because it was clever, Dorothea said. Her voice was thin. The rattle filled the spaces between words. It saved them because you listened when it changed. Dorothea Kipp died in the first week of June, 1889, in a bed Alma had made for her in the vault, because the vault was where Dorothea was most comfortable, and because a woman who had spent her life understanding brick and mortar and draft and damp deserved to die in a room that met her standards. Alma sat with her through the last night. The bare fat lamp burned on the shelf. The stove was cold. June did not need it. The air in the vault was 54 degrees, cool and dry and steady, and the faint pull of the flue whispered through the vent the way it had whispered since before Alma found the stair. Alma buried Dorothea on the hillside above the vault, near the vent cap, where the warm air rising from below would keep the ground soft longer than anywhere else on the property. She set the flat vent stone as a temporary marker and carved nothing into it, because she did not yet know what words were adequate, and she would not put inadequate words on Dorothea's grave. She went back down the 9 steps and hung the mason's hammer on the nail where the thermometer had been. The thermometer she moved to the opposite wall. The hammer stayed where Dorothea's hand would have reached for it, eye level, near the stove, where the heat kept the handle dry. Then she sat on the cot and pressed her palms to her knees, the way she had pressed them on the day she first found the coal, and she did not cry because Dorothea had not taught her to cry. Dorothea had taught her to check the draft. Alma checked the draft. The candle leaned, the air moved, the room was still breathing. The trouble came in early July. Pike had spent the spring selling underground rooms, not rooms like Alma's, not vaulted brick chambers with proper drainage and dual vents and flues traced through masonry by a woman who had spent 30 years working brewery cellars. Pike sold holes. He sold the idea of Alma's vault without the knowledge behind it, the way a man might sell the shape of a key without understanding the lock. 3 families along the low road paid Pike to dig cellars. He charged $8 each, hired 2 boys and a man with a bad back, and dug rectangular pits 6 feet deep with no drainage channel, no vent shaft, no brick lining, and no understanding of what happened to an underground room when water found it. He capped each pit with salvaged timbers and a layer of sod, and told the families they had storm shelters. He called them Breckus-style cellars because the name carried weight now, and weight was what Pike sold. The thaw came fast that year. Snowmelt ran off the bluffs and pooled along the low road where the grade flattened. Water found the 3 cellars the way water always finds the lowest point, quietly, steadily, without announcement. 2 of the cellars flooded to the knee by mid-June. The families bailed for a week, then gave up. Pike told them the drainage would improve once the ground dried. The ground did not dry. The cellars filled again with every rain. The 3rd cellar was worse. It had been dug into a hillside where the soil was loose clay over gravel, and the timbers Pike had used for the roof were green oak, heavy, wet, and prone to warping as they dried. In early July, after 3 days of steady rain, the entrance collapsed. The timbers buckled inward. The sod cap dropped 4 feet, carrying a wall of mud with it. A milk cow that had been tethered near the entrance fell into the hole and landed on its side in 2 feet of standing water. And a child, a girl of 6, the daughter of the family who had paid Pike $8 for safety, was standing in the entrance when the timbers gave way. Alma heard about it from Niels, who rode to the vault at a run. She grabbed the mason's hammer, a length of rope, and the candle box, and followed him on foot because she did not own a horse. When she arrived, 8 men were digging at the collapsed entrance with shovels and bare hands. Pike was among them, shouting directions: dig straight in, clear the timbers, pull the sod off the top. The men were following his orders because Pike was loud and present, and no one else was giving orders. Alma pushed through the group and looked at the collapse. Then she looked at Pike. "Stop digging," she said. Pike ignored her. He drove his shovel into the mud at the entrance. "Stop," Alma said again, louder. "If you dig straight in, you will pull the remaining timbers down. The roof is resting on the collapsed section. Remove the collapsed section and the roof falls on the child." Pike stopped. The men stopped. 8 faces turned toward a 19-year-old girl holding a mason's hammer. "The child is inside?" Alma asked the mother, who was standing 10 feet back with her hands over her mouth. The mother nodded. "Is she talking? Is she making sound?" "She was crying," the mother said. "A minute ago, she stopped." Alma looked at the hillside above the collapse. The slope was saturated with rain. More soil would come down if they disturbed the grade above. She looked at the collapsed timbers. 2 had buckled, but not broken. They were jammed at angles that created a narrow gap between them, roughly 18 inches wide. If the child was in that gap, she was alive. If she was under the timbers were holding the weight of the soil off her body, and removing the timbers would drop the weight. "We dig from below," Alma said. "Not above. Not through the entrance." She pointed to a spot 8 feet downhill from the collapse, where the ground sloped away and the water was draining. "We cut a relief trench here, downhill. The water drains out first. Once the water drops, the pressure on the timbers drops. Then we go in through the gap." Pike said, "That will take an hour. The girl does not have an hour." "The girl has more time than you think," Alma said. "She has air. The cow is breathing, which means the chamber still has an air pocket. If we rush in and collapse the entrance further, we lose the air pocket and we lose the girl. Slow saves her. Fast kills her." She did not wait for Pike to agree. She handed the rope to Niels and told him to stake it as a guideline for the trench. She took the forge shovel from the nearest man and began cutting a drainage channel downhill from the collapse, 2 feet deep, angled to pull standing water out of the pit. The water moved. Slowly at first, then faster as the trench deepened and the grade took over. Muddy water poured out of the channel and ran downhill toward the road, and inside the collapsed cellar the water level began to drop. After 30 minutes, the mud at the entrance was no longer liquid. After 45, Alma could hear the cow moving, shifting its weight, groaning, alive. She lit the candle and held it at the gap between the buckled timbers. The flame burned steady, air inside. She turned sideways and pushed through the gap. Inside was dark, close, and heavy with the smell of wet clay and cow. The girl was wedged between the cow's body and the far wall, sitting in 4 inches of mud, crying without sound, the silent, exhausted crying of a child who has used up all the loud crying and has only the motion left. She was muddy, bruised, and cold, but she was breathing and her eyes were open, and she reached for Alma's hand when Alma held it out. Alma passed the girl through the gap to Niels. Then she backed out herself, and the 8 men who had been digging at Pike's direction stood in the rain and watched a girl of 6 emerge from a hole that should have been a grave. The mother took the child and did not speak. She held her daughter the way Beret had held Tolif, beyond language, beyond gratitude, in the country of the body where words have no currency. Alma turned to Pike. Mud covered her to the waist. The mason's hammer hung from her belt. She was breathing hard, and her hands were shaking, and she looked at Pike with an expression that was not anger. It was something colder than anger. It was measurement. "You built 3 cellars," Alma said. "No drainage, no venting, no lining, green timber for a roof." Pike said, "People wanted shelters. I built shelters." "You built traps," Alma said. "You sold the shape of what I did without knowing why it works. Drainage first, air second, heat third. You skipped all 3 and charged $8. Pike's face did not change. He had the face of a man who has been caught, but has not yet decided whether to admit it. He looked at the collapsed entrance. A at the cow still trapped inside, at the girl clinging to her mother. "You put ideas in people's heads," Pike said. "People who cannot build what you built. That is your doing, not mine." Alma did not respond to this. She turned to the cluster of farmers and their wives and said the things she had come to say. "If you are going to build underground, I will teach you how, for nothing, but you will build it correctly or you will not build it at all. Drainage first, a channel cut below the floor grade, angled downhill, open at the outlet. Air second, 2 paths minimum, one low, one high, neither of them blockable by snow or collapse. Heat third, and only third after the room can breathe and the water can leave." She held up the mason's hammer. "Test every brick before you trust it. A clear ring means the bond is good. A dull ring means the mortar has failed. Do not guess. Listen." If this story reminds you why preparation matters, share it with someone who needs to hear it. She taught 5 families that week. She walked each property, identified the grade, marked the drainage line with stakes, and showed them where to dig and where not to dig. She showed them how to test an arch by tapping. She showed them that a candle flame tells you everything about the air in a room if you watch it instead of watching the room. She showed them that a cold plate held near a wall will bead with moisture if the wall is seeping, and that seepage you cannot see will rot everything you store against it. She showed them that a vent cap must sit above the expected snow line, and that the expected snow line in Minnesota is always higher than you think. She did not charge. She did not ask for trade. She taught because Dorothea had taught her, and because Dorothea had not charged, and because knowledge that saves lives is not a product, it is a debt owed forward. Pike watched from the road. He did not interfere. He did not help. He stood and watched a 19-year-old girl dismantle his business by giving away for free what he had sold for $8 a hole, and his face held the expression of a man calculating loss. But Pike was not finished. On the last day of July, he filed a civil complaint with the township clerk, claiming that Alma's teaching had damaged his business by encouraging people to build their own shelters instead of hiring him. The complaint cited 3 lost contracts and demanded $12 in damages. Alma read the complaint by lamplight in the vault. The bare fat lamp cast a steady glow on the paper. Dorothea's hammer hung on the wall behind her. The stove was cold. July did not need it. The air in the chamber was 55 degrees, and the faint pull of the flue kept the space dry and clear. She folded the complaint and set it on the shelf beside the crocks. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no knowledge of law. She had a vault, a hammer, a reputation that had grown from mockery to authority in 9 months, and a town that was beginning to divide between people who trusted her and people who feared what her knowledge cost them. The complaint would be heard at a township meeting in the schoolhouse in October. Pike would bring a lawyer's letter. Alma did not know what she would bring. She only knew that the room around her, the room Quaid had called a grave, the room Pike had called worthless, the room Beret had refused to enter and then carried her children into, was the only argument she had ever needed to make. She oiled the handle of Dorothea's hammer with a little bear grease, the way Dorothea had asked. The wood darkened and the grain rose, and the handle felt warm in her hand, warmer than iron should feel in a cool room, as if the tool remembered the hands that had held it before. 8 months ago, she'd stood at the rim of a hole with a cracked shovel and $3. Now the hole had a name, and the name was hers. But a name she was learning was something other people could use against you as easily as they could use it for you. And Pike was a man who understood the uses of names better than anyone in Goodhue County. October came cold and early. The maples along the bluff road turned the color of rust and dropped their leaves in a single week of hard frost, and the bare branches made the sky look larger than it had in months, open, pale, indifferent. Alma stacked the last of her salvaged kindling in the vault's wood alcove, checked the coal supply against the notches on the wall, and calculated she had enough anthracite for one full winter if she held to one scuttle on mild nights and two on hard wind. The bare fat crocks were down to 3. She had used one for lamp oil through the summer and another for stove-starting boot grease and the oiling of Dorothea's hammer. The fat that remained would last until March if she trimmed the lamp wick low and used wood shavings instead of fat-soaked cloth for starting the coal. The township meeting was set for the second Tuesday of October in the one-room schoolhouse a mile north of Red Wing. Alma had never been inside the schoolhouse. Poor farm children were not enrolled. She had learned to read from the farm matron's discarded newspapers and a Bible with a broken spine, and the schoolhouse had always been a building she passed on the road and did not enter, the way she passed the church and the bank and every other place that belonged to people who were not her. Now she would stand inside it and answer a complaint filed by the man who had tried to steal her coal, sell her method, and bury a child through negligence. She had no lawyer. She had no money for a lawyer. She had spent 2 weeks thinking about what she could bring instead. On the morning of the meeting, Alma descended the 9 steps, collected 4 objects, and wrapped them in a cloth. She walked to the schoolhouse in the thin October light with the bundle under her arm and Dorothea's hammer on her belt. The room was full, not standing room full, sitting on window sills full. Quaid sat in the front row with his cane across his knees. Bure sat near the door with Tolef, who was 10 now and tall enough that his feet reached the floor. Niels Solheim stood at the back wall with his arms folded. Griff the teamster sat beside 2 farmers Alma had taught to dig drainage trenches. The churchwoman sat with her husband. Deputy Teague stood by the stove with his hat in his hands. Pike sat at the teacher's desk with a single sheet of paper in front of him. The lawyer's letter. $12 in damages. 3 lost contracts. The complaint that Alma's teaching had destroyed his business by giving away what he sold. The township clerk called the meeting to order and read the complaint aloud. The language was formal and stiff. Willful interference with lawful commerce. Inducement to self-construction without professional oversight. Material damage to established trade. The words sounded like they had been written by someone who charged by the sentence. The clerk asked Pike to speak first. Pike stood. He smoothed the letter on the desk and spoke clearly, with the composure of a man who had rehearsed. I built 3 shelters for families who needed them, Pike said. I charged a fair price for honest labor. Miss Brecky then told those same families and others that my work was deficient, and she offered to teach them to build their own shelters for free. 3 families canceled contracts. I lost $12 in committed work. I'm asking the township to recognize that my trade was damaged by interference. He sat down. The room was quiet. Alma stood. She did not speak immediately. She unwrapped the cloth bundle and set 4 objects on the table beside Pike's letter. The first object was a piece of brick. She held it up so the room could see it. The brick was cracked down the center, soft at the edges where water had worked into the clay, and the mortar clinging to one side was gray and crumbly. This is from Pike's cellar on the low road, Alma said. The one that collapsed. The brick was not fired hard enough to bear weight, and the mortar was mixed with too much sand. This joint failed because the materials were wrong. She set the brick down and picked up the second object. A section of wooden vent cap, roughly 8 inches square, packed solid with dried mud. This is from Pike's second cellar, Alma said. The vent was capped with wood laid flat on the ground. Rain washed mud over it within a week. The vent sealed. The family inside would have had no air exchange. In winter, with a fire, they would have had coal gas instead. She set the cap down and picked up the third object, a charcoal sketch on a piece of smooth board. Dorothea had drawn it. The proportions were careful. the lines precise, the labels written in a small, firm hand. It showed a cross-section of a proper underground chamber, drainage channel below the floor grade, angled to an outlet. 2 vent paths, one low and one high, brick lining on all surfaces, stove set on stone pads, flue traced through the wall to a capped outlet above the expected snow line. "This is how the room should be built," Alma said. "Drainage first, air second, heat third. Every step matters. Skip one, and the room becomes a trap." She set the sketch down. Then she picked up the 4th object. 2 glass jars, preserving jars, wide-mouthed, clear. She had borrowed them from Beret. She lit a candle stub and set it inside the first jar. Then she covered the jar's mouth with a flat piece of tin, sealing it. The candle flame shrank. It guttered. It died. Thin smoke curled against the inside of the glass. She lit a second candle stub and set it inside the second jar. This jar had a small hole punched in the tin cover, a vent no wider than a pencil. Alma sealed the mouth with the punctured tin. The candle flame dipped, steadied, and burned. Not brightly, but it burned. The smoke rose through the hole in a thin thread, and fresh air entered from below the tin's edge, and the flame held. The room understood before she said a word. "Air," Alma said. "Without it, the fire dies. Without it, the person dies. A vent is not decoration. A vent is not optional. A vent is the difference between a room and a coffin." She looked at Pike. "I did not damage your business, Mr. Pike. Your business was damaged the moment you sealed a family underground without giving them a way to breathe." Pike opened his mouth. Before he could speak, a voice came from the back of the room. He would not go in. The room turned. Jem Croy stood near the door, 11 years old, tall for his age, wearing a coat that was too short in the sleeves because he had grown 3 inches since January. His face was red. His hands were fists at his sides. He was looking at Pike with an expression that was not a child's expression. It was the face of someone who had been carried out of a blizzard and had spent 9 months deciding what to say about the man who had left him there. "During the storm," Jem said, "Miss Brecka brought us into the cellar. Tollef and me. She carried us down the stairs. She lit the fire. She wrapped us in blankets. She went back out into the storm to clear the vent so we could breathe." His voice was steady. The room was silent. Mr. Pike found the rope outside. He came to the stair. Miss Brecka told him to come inside. He would not go in. Jem looked at Pike. Pike's face had gone flat, not angry, not defensive, but empty, the way a face goes when the body behind it is calculating whether to fight or to fold. "He stood in the wind," Jem said. "I could hear him. I was inside and I could hear him standing above the stair. I was so cold I could not feel my feet, and he would not come in because it was her cellar, and coming in meant she was right." Jem's voice cracked on the last word. He pressed his lips together and looked at the floor. "He came in after," Jem said, quieter, "when he could not stand any more, but he would not come in when I needed him to." The room did not move. Pike sat at the teacher's desk with his hands flat on the lawyer's letter, and the letter looked small beneath his fingers, a piece of paper that had seemed adequate an hour ago, and now seemed like something a man holds when he has nothing else. Quaid stood. He did not look at Pike. He looked at the township clerk. "I move to dismiss the complaint," Quaid said, "and I recommend that the township adopt Miss Brecka's construction standards for any underground shelter built in Goodhue County." The clerk called a voice vote. The motion carried without opposition. Pike did not vote. He sat at the desk while the room emptied around him, and when the last person had gone, he folded the lawyer's letter into quarters and put it in his coat. On the schoolhouse steps, in the thin October light, Pike stopped beside Alma. She was standing with the cloth bundle under her arm and the mason's hammer on her belt, and she did not step aside. "The girl knew the ground better than I did," Pike said. He said it without warmth. He said it without concession in his voice. He said it the way a man states a measurement he has verified and cannot dispute, a fact that costs him something to acknowledge and would cost him more to deny. He walked to his wagon and left. Alma watched him go and understood that Pike would never become an ally. He would never offer help. He would never speak of the blizzard night or the collapsed cellar or the boy who had testified against him. But he would stop fighting her, because fighting her now meant fighting a room full of people who had seen the candle die in the sealed jar and the candle live in the vented one, and Pike was a man who understood when the numbers had turned against him. Niels brought the forge marks to the vault on a November morning 3 weeks after the meeting. He had stamped them himself, 2 iron plates, each the size of a man's palm, with raised letters cut in reverse so they pressed cleanly into wet mortar. One plate read Solheim, the other read Brecka. He set them on the shelf beside the crocks and said, "For the cellar doors, if you want them." Alma looked at the plates. She picked up the one that read Brecka and turned it in her hands. The letters were clean and deep, and the iron was warm from Niels's coat pocket. "You made 2, she said. "I made 2. "Why yours?" Niels leaned against the wall. He was not good at explaining things that were not made of iron. His face worked through several expressions that did not quite settle into any of them. Finally he said, "Because I would like my name beside yours, on the doors, and elsewhere." Alma set the plate down. She looked at Niels. He was 29 now, broader than when she had first walked into his forge with ruined hands and a request for stove repair. He had never told her she could not do what she was doing. He had never doubted the vault. He had argued measurements with her, the angle of a vent cap, the gauge of a stovepipe, the proper distance between a flue and a load-bearing joint. And she had argued back, and neither of them had backed down, and the arguments had made the work better. "Your name goes beside mine," Alma said. "Not over it." "I would not have offered it any other way," Niels said. Their courtship, such as it was, had been conducted in iron and brick. He built stove fittings. She corrected his first vent design. The cap was too low, and snow would seal it by January. He admired that she would argue a measurement with a man who forged metal for a living. She admired that he listened to the argument and changed the measurement when she was right. Neither of them spoke about admiration. They spoke about clearances, tolerances, and the thermal expansion of iron pipe in enclosed spaces, and these conversations served the same purpose that other conversations served for other people. They married in the spring of 1891, in the schoolhouse, with Quaid as witness and Beret holding a bundle of early wildflowers that Tolef had picked from the hillside above the vent cap. Alma wore a dress she had sewn from cloth Beret had given her, and Niels wore a clean shirt that still smelled faintly of forge smoke, because forge smoke does not leave a garment no matter how many times it is washed. The mason's hammer hung on the vault wall during the ceremony, and when they returned to the cellar lot afterward, Alma pressed the 2 forge plates into wet mortar above the new door frame that Niels had built. Brecka on the left, Solheim on the right, with a gap between them the width of a finger. The years after the marriage were building years. Niels moved his smaller tools to a shed on the cellar lot and kept the main forge in Red Wing. Alma expanded the surface structures, a garden, a chicken pen, a root storage annex connected to the original vault by a short passage that Niels lined with brick from a demolished brewery in Hastings. The original vault remained the center, storm shelter, winter pantry, demonstration room, and the place where Alma taught. Over 6 years, they built 12 underground shelters for families in the township. 4 were storage only, cool rooms for milk, cream, cheese, and root vegetables, dug into hillsides with proper drainage and single vents. 5 were storm shelters, larger chambers with dual vents, reinforced arches, and entry stairs wide enough for a family to descend in the dark. 3 were heated work and sleep rooms for families too poor to build full-frame additions to their houses. Rooms with iron stoves, flue channels, coal or wood storage, and the drainage air heat sequence that Alma taught to every person who picked up a shovel. She charged nothing for the teaching. She charged fair labor rates for the building, and Niels charged fair rates for the iron work, and the families who could not pay in money paid in trade, oats, flour, a side of pork, 2 days' help with the garden, a load of dry oak split and stacked. The economy of the Cellar lot was not the economy of Pike's contracts. It was the economy of work exchanged for work, knowledge exchanged for trust, and skill exchanged for the assurance that the skill would be used correctly. Alma never sold the original vault. She used it as a demonstration room for new families, a winter pantry for her own stores, and an emergency refuge for anyone caught on the road when weather turned. The door was never locked. The stove was always ready. The coal bin was always stocked, and the bare fat lamp, the last one, the crock that had outlasted the others, sat on the brick shelf near the stair where its yellow light was the first thing a person saw coming down the steps. The bare fat crocks emptied over the years. Lamp oil, boot grease, stove starting, leather dressing for Niels's forge apron, and one memorable pie crust that Beret made during a church supper, using the last quarter cup of rendered fat because butter was short and bear grease was what she had. The crust was golden, flaky, and rich in a way that no one could identify until Beret admitted the ingredient, at which point 3 women asked for the recipe and 2 refused to finish their slices. Beret said the pie tasted better than pride, and Alma laughed so hard she had to sit down, which was notable because Alma did not laugh often and never loudly. Vent caps rose above the snow line on 7 farms within 5 years. Children in the township were taught the candle test. Hold a flame near the floor of a closed room and watch it. If it shrinks, the air is wrong. If it dies, you leave. Tolf Vangen, the boy who had been carried into the vault with blue lips and a cough that shook his whole body, grew into a young man who helped dig drainage trenches for other families' cellars. He never forgot the sound of the stove drawing after Alma cleared the vent, the sudden roar of blue flame through the mica window, the room warming around him like a hand closing gently over a cold fist. Abaus, Alma and Niels raised 2 children, a son born in 1893 and a daughter born in 1896. Both learned to test brick with the mason's hammer before they learned to ride a horse. Both could run the night sequence, check draft, shake ash, touch pipe, test candle. By the age of 8. The hammer hung on the same nail in the vault where Alma had placed it after Dorothea died, and the children knew not to touch it without asking, not because it was fragile, but because it was earned. In the winter of 1900, Alma took in a poor farm girl for 2 seasons. The girl was 14, thin-wristed, quiet the way Alma had been quiet, not from timidity, but from the habit of observing before speaking. Alma did not take her in as charity. She hired her as paid help, taught her to mix mortar and test drainage, and sent her back to the county at 16 with a trade, a reference letter signed by Quaid, and the knowledge that a room could be built from nothing if the builder listened to the ground before she listened to the town. The years compressed the way years do when the work is steady and the crises are smaller. Niels's forge expanded, the garden grew. The chicken pen became a proper coop with a stone foundation. The vault needed repointing every 5 years. Lime mortar does not last forever, even below frost line, and each repointing was a lesson Alma taught to whoever was available to learn. She showed them the same thing Dorothea had shown her. Tap the brick, listen for the note, mark the bad joints, and fix them before winter. The wall will tell you what it needs if you ask it correctly. Alma lived long enough to see ice boxes in the general store and then electric light on the main street of Red Wing. She watched the county road get graded and graveled and then, eventually, paved. She watched the schoolhouse get a second room and then a bell tower. She watched Pike sell his last parcel and move to St. Paul, where he died in 1912 of causes no one in Goodhue County inquired about. She kept the bare, fat lamp on a shelf in the vault long after the last crock was empty. The lamp sat beside Dorothea's hammer, the tin cup, the cotton wick, the faint residue of fat that had dried to a thin film on the inside, and visitors sometimes asked what it was. Alma told them it was a lamp. She did not tell them it was the first light she had ever owned. On a September afternoon in 1931, when Alma was 63, she descended the 9 brick steps with her granddaughter. The child was 7, the same age Alma had been when her mother died, though the child did not know this and Alma did not mention it. The vault was cool and dry, the way it had been cool and dry for 43 years. The walls were darker now, soot and age, and the slow accumulation of decades of lamplight had stained the lime wash to the color of old paper. The stove was the same stove, patched twice more by Niels, the mica window replaced with a piece of glass from a broken lantern. The drainage channel ran clear. The flue drew. Alma did not tell the child the room was special. She did not tell her it had saved lives. She did not explain the blizzard or the children or the man who had refused to come inside. She said, "Listen." The child stood in the center of the chamber and listened. For a moment there was nothing, the silence of earth, of brick, of a room that had been holding its temperature steady since before the child was born. Then she heard it, the faint pull of air through the vent, the slow, patient breath of the flue, drawing air from the stair, through the chamber, and up through the east wall to the sky. A sound so quiet it could only be heard by a person who was not trying to hear anything else. "What is that?" the child asked. "The room," Alma said. "Breathing." More than a dozen families in Goodhue County learned Alma Brecca's rules directly. Drainage first, air second, heat third, and more copied them through Quade's County sketches and the charcoal diagrams Alma drew on any surface flat enough to hold a line. The most visible legacy was not the original vault, but the habit it created. Vent caps set above drift line on 7 farms, drains cut before walls were finished, and children taught that a candle can tell you what a room will not. Tolliff Vangen dug trenches into his 40s. Jem Croy, Pike's former hired boy, built his own banked cellar in 1903 using every specification Alma had published on a board. Alma Brecca Solheim lived out her life on the Assen cellar lot, no longer a tax remnant, but a working homestead with a forge shed, a garden, a coop, a banked pantry, and the original brick chamber beneath the hill. She oiled Dorothea's hammer every autumn before the first hard freeze, the way Dorothea had asked, using bear grease she saved from the last crock, and then, when the grease was gone, lard from her own kitchen that she warmed in her hands first, so it went into the grain evenly. She died in March of 1934, in the vault, in the cot Niels had welded from salvage iron, with the bare, fat lamp on the shelf beside her, and the faint pull of the flue, the last sound she heard. January 12th, 1888. 34 degrees at dawn, and by afternoon the sky was a wall. The temperature fell below measurement. The snow flew sideways. A man named Darius Pike stood above a buried stair and said a girl had bought a grave for $3. Below that stair, behind an iron door, A coal fire burned blue in a stove that a blacksmith had patched, and a woman had fed through the night. Two children breathed under a wool blanket. The brick arch held. The drainage channel ran dry. The vent cap, cleared by bare hands in a whiteout, drew the poison up and out and let the clean air fall. The grave had a flue. The hole had an arch. The dirt had been holding back a room. And on the brick shelf, casting its small yellow light across the lime-washed walls, the bare fat lamp burned steady, the first fire Alma Brecca had ever owned, the last one she would ever need. The town had seen a hole in the ground. Alma Brecca had heard it breathing,